another, ruling dynasty.
In broadcasting, when ever the song
amongst the dignitaries here include the former
Send Down the Rain is played, it's almost certain it will rain that day.
Well, I'm sure nobody played that song yesterday.
You can't be sure.
Well, there's so many stations.
Exactly. Lagos alone has about 40 radio stations, and you can imagine how many we have in every part of the country. So, and they stream online now, so you never can tell. So if you heard the sky looks misty and cloudy, almost certain
it will look misty and cloudy.
It's going to rain. And then add to that what that lady sang in the song, talked about rain. Yes, not rainwater. It's about rain. Anyway, talking about rains, during the week, the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency, NISA, warned that Nigeria is inching closer to a peak of the rainy season and is urging states, local governments, and you to embark on precautionary measures to prevent cases of flooding. So, as the rainy season approaches, the peak of the rainy season approaches, because people are still wondering, are we in the rainy season already?
It looks like it.
Well, we are.
Okay, all right. I stand corrected.
So, how well should we prepare for the peak? And how well have we prepared for the moment that we have on our hands? Mr. Ola Oresanya joins us this morning. He is an environmental consultant. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
As well as the Director General, Nigeria Hydrological Service Agency, Clement Nze. He joins us from our studios in Abuja. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let me begin with you. Yes, Mr. Nze. In the course of the week, you put out a statement urging strict town planning codes to be enforced and calling for constructions of flood walls, buffer dams, dikes, and other infrastructure. Question I want to first of all ask you is, isn't it too late in the day for us to be talking about preparing for the rains when it's already here?
I should expect so much from him.
The title of Madakin's comes with
it's not quite late.
And the celebrant believes that the task
some states that have been heeding our warnings already at work months back. I can tell you authoritatively, Jigawa State has been at work based on what happened in 2020. I was here anyway to see things for myself. Jigawa State has been working. They heeded our warnings. They saw what happened in 2020, and they have been at work.
From where it is today,
KB State, which was the worst hit in 2020 flooding, where over 450,000 farmlands where they plant rice were washed away or inundated. KB State has been at work to ensure that there is no repeat of what happened in 2020 to take place in 2021. The National Emergency Management Agency have been doing some remedial works in Abeokuta. There was a heavy destruction in 2018. I was there among the presidential team that went to see things in conjunction with NEMA, National Water Resources Institute in Kaduna, Ogun River Basin, and other relevant agencies. So, work is going on in Abeokuta. I mentioned Abeokuta because it was actually terribly hit in July 2018. Just a 3-hour rainfall that took place there. So, any state that have been listening to us ought to have taken certain steps before this date. And again, I will say that the past of rains we are experiencing is not actually the real onset of a rainy season in some parts of the country. We are yet to enter into it, just as you mentioned in your intro. So there is still time for states, local governments, councils, and even individuals to take actions.
For more information,
We have this conversation.
Download the Airtel TV
And
app
every
to watch
year,
all the
the
fun
same
and exciting
things are
performances
said
of The Voice Nigeria Season 3
about
every Saturday and
what
Sunday.
individuals
8 p.m.
can do
The
to
Voice
prevent
Nigeria.
floods.
Connect
Forget
the
the state governments and how they sell land that is supposed to be on
Welcome back. It's still Metro
water
right
planes
here
and all
on
that.
Channels
What the
Television. I'll bring
individual
you back
can
to
do.
Lagos. Let's go join family and
From
friends
your
of the
experience
General
as
Manager
an
for
environmental
Marketing,
consultant,
MTN Nigeria,
does
Mr.
it seem
Omowole
to you like
Olarawaju for
the people are
final
listening
rights
to all this? And as the years have gone by, are our
short
habits
life, one might say,
improving
but for
to
most
an
of his
extent that will
44 years,
affect
he created a
the
positive
flooding of
impact
this year?
and attained high positions.
Well,
that many of
I
his
think
age mates still
from my
dream of
experience,
achieving.
it's like
came as a
I would still put the
big shock to
blame
them,
back at the
considering
doorstep
that
of
he was
government.
someone who had so
Because
much to give
when it
back
comes to
society.
managing the
With a deep
consequence
sense
of
loss and total submission to God.
these infractions, it still falls back on government. So why don't you prevent in the first instance? Why do we wait until we have disaster and we start spending billions on those who have impacted this disaster? Why don't you spend less of that billion to prevent the disaster? All right. Many people perish for lack of knowledge. For example, farming by the riverbank, you have a dam upstream, and the riverbanks are constrained, and you already have a setbacks that are fertile for farming. That's actually the essence, all right, of farming by those riverbanks. They're very fertile, all right. Now, you need to provide agricultural services to these farmers to let them know that whatever kind of cropping you want to put by this riverbank, you must harvest just before time T. So you know the kind of crop you can plant at those areas that you must harvest before the release of dam and the rest of it. So the farmer will hit to that, and that they will run, but many of them don't have this knowledge, and that we rather wait until when we now have the excessive, the intense rainfall, and we're now talking about 100 people died, 10 billion houses got destroyed, and we start voting money.
You're touching on a sore point for me.
Right.
You know, especially when you talk about agriculture, we'll get to that part, because rain has its use, so to speak, in our national lives. But I think what Alero is asking is our attitudes as a people. Over the years, I have seen personally, and I'm pretty sure you may have seen or heard it as well, that people literally dump garbage in the drainages, expecting that the rain will wash it away. Where to? I don't think anyone really asks that question. So I think Alero's question is, have our attitudes as a people and our habits in that terms, has it improved irrespective of all of the conversations that we hear from government agencies such as NISA?
Definitely not. You can't see any significant improvement because the structure on ground is not getting that kind of function. Okay?
When you say the structure on ground, what are you talking about?
It's the policy and the structure of governance that puts you in line to function properly. It's the average human being you don't want to obey the law, but you want to break the line. But because you know if you break the line that somebody's going to arrest you, then you conform. The typical man that will urinate by the roadside here in Nigeria, because you know there's no reprimand for it, I will now say it's his habit. The same man will get to a more organized society, and he will not do that because he knows that immediately you're arrested and there's a reprimand for that. So you conform. So it's a structure. It still tells you something is wrong with the way we structure ourselves. And it's not just about habit, it's a tolerance. Okay, the system tolerates us for not conforming with the normal rules and regulations. So it still falls back on who is managing this social, the social contracts with the people. So it's you that determines how the people will comply.
Oh, okay, Mr. Nze, I don't know if you have a thing or two to say about that, because I'm pretty sure while the warnings go out from your agency to the states, there must have been some recommendations. What are some of the things that you found out from the Jigawa state, the Kebbi state that you mentioned, for instance? What kind of habits made the states vulnerable to the levels of flooding and destruction that followed?
Now, you cannot totally eliminate the destruction that follows flooding, or once flooding takes place. What we strive to achieve is to reduce the level of destruction. Flood is a kind of hazard. But when no appropriate steps are taken to contain that hazard, it transforms to disaster. Now, the states I mentioned, the topography, the geology, some of those places are flat, and the river system. And again, like my friend at the studio mentioned, the inability of government at certain levels to enforce discipline. Like Jigawa, for instance, a lot of structures have been removed. Government has the powers to do that. In Abuja, so many houses were removed in 2020. But then, that's after the damages have been done. So many houses were removed, more than 150 were pulled down, that are within the flood plains or the pathway for the flood. There will always be flood. But if proper actions are taken by relevant authorities or government that have the apparatus, the powers, they take necessary actions, and then individuals too, the destruction will not take place. For instance, in Abeokuta, we discovered that people were building very close to, there's a major river channel, or yes, channel. It could be empty during the dry season. Nature provided it like that. But human interventions, anthropogenic activities of man, we begin to appropriate where nature has provided for itself during rainy season to convert the excess runoff. That gives rise to disaster. That's what has happened in some of these locations. For instance, Kebbi State, the governor, we were in a studio, I think NTA, Good Morning Nigeria. He acknowledged that they heeded the warning given by our agency. That was why, though they lost a lot in terms of agriculture, but human losses were quite minimal. Not minding, they are the first recipient of whatever happens upstream of Niger, of 7 countries upstream of Nigeria, or 6 countries upstream of Nigeria, that once it begins to happen at a certain period of the year, right from Futajalan Highlands in Guinea, going through Mali, Niger, Benin Republic, and then inflows from Burkina Faso and Cote d'Ivoire. Kebbi State is the first casualty. And they fell, so much for it last year. There was nothing much anybody could do to reduce it at that point in time.
Now, Mr. Nze, how much rain are we expecting this year?
I think this falls categorically within the purview of the relevant agency of government, the Nigeria Meteorological Agency, NIMET. But we work hand in hand. Going by their prediction, they mention that the earliest onset of rains in the coastal part of Nigeria will be 1st of March, plus or minus about 5 days or so. It began to rain in Sapele, February 25th. and it has been more or less continuous. If you add 5 days to 25th of February, it gives you something more than 98% accurate to that prediction of March 1st. On the far north, NIMET mentioned that the earliest onset, starting from Katsina, will be around 9th of June. And then when it comes to cessation dates, it will begin to cease from the far north around October 26, and in the southern part of Nigeria, December 25. Now, given this kind of scenario, there are, in between, there are certain things you cannot, predict at such long range, but weekly, NIMET, or even more than that, hourly keeps giving you information as what to expect in terms of rainfall. Like I mentioned, what I'm just giving you is a kind of a skeleton. NIMET is the best authority to speak on that. But we work in conjunction because rainfall is a major factor that contributes or aggravates flooding in the country, or in fact anywhere.
You have given us enough information. Anyway.
More than enough. But Mr. Asaya, again, he has drawn closer to the agricultural bit. But before we go there, and that's one thing that I want to take off with you first before we go back to him. Let me ask you this. You are also special advisor to the governor of Ogun State on environment. And as he has said, there is always the need to do some things, knowing certain things that are sure to happen. The Ogun River Basin, for instance, is something that usually released at least once a year, and it usually is a headache for the people in the environment, especially around us here in Sherry and all of that. So what's the plan? Because a good number of people usually have to leave their houses for weeks. And I don't know, is there an end to that in sight, or is that something that's still certain to happen this year?
Well, when you look at the topography of the Isheri area, which is downstream the Ogun River Basin, it's empty of the tributaries of that feeds into the lagoon, or the Lagos Lagoon. And one of the key things that you look for towards flood management, it's the risk mapping. And I think this area that happens to be within the floodplain is a high-risk zone based on certain things. Now, the tidal surge, is a factor that locks the speed at which you discharge into the lagoon in this area. All right, so no matter what you even do upstream, dredging and whatever, you cannot do anything about the tidal lock. So what do? The next thing is to improve in what we call the dikes around the flood-prone areas, just like the Isheri Oshun, and make sure that lives are preserved, so that by the time you have the tidal lock, you have the inflow and you have the rise in the water level, then you can have embankment that will shield the settlements behind those areas. So looking at the history, the data, for the sequence of the tidal lock, which we already have in Ogun State right now, we can predict precisely, even by the time you have to open up the dam, because it's a natural thing, you cannot hold the water and threaten the integrity of the dam. The dam must be open and the water must flow. And the water must flow through the through the plains, all right, and naturally discharge into the lagoon. So it must come. And we can predict the volume. For example, Ogun State is going to have the highest rainfall around June, and it's going to be like about 420 centimeter in the month of July for Ogun State. And that tells you the volume. And the daily average throughout the year for Ogun State is about 220. So in the month of June, you're going to have almost like 18 days of rainfall intense. And that will affect the flow that is already coming upstream. The dam will have been opened earlier upstream, and the Ogun River Basin must open up its dam around July. And the impact will be felt around August, September downstream. So that's a preparation to make sure that everybody within the embankment, you leave the area. Recently, we had advocacy at the Kara market, okay, so that part of the habit of the market is that they dump their refuse inside that water, and that they kind of constrain the flow in that area. Right now, there's an improved waste management services for them to reduce that, and also to train them on how to move away from the riverbanks. So you will have noticed some changes in that area. But the residents around the Sherry area and the rest of it, the solution is to increase, one, the road level, which the government has done. You will have seen that the road level have improved by almost 0.6 centimeter, 0.6 of a meter. The levels of the road have improved, and drainage channel have been constructed so that when you have flows, it will go through the. So these are
very quick one before we take a break.
Right.
Is this in any way suggesting that people need to leave the area permanently?
Well, there are some areas where until you have the dike, you may have to manage the ding-dong of moving off and coming back until we have a dike.
Perhaps the government, you're going to have to look for a settlement for them. But we'll take on the agricultural bit that I talked about when we return from this break. Please stay with us.
All right.
All right, thanks for staying with us. So, I don't know, you were going to ask first about the refuse before we go into agriculture.
Yes, and I think that Mr. Oresoya here is the apt person to answer this question, because before he went over to Ogun, he was a big man here in Loma. And I was saying to him during the break that when I look at the street sweepers, I feel very, very sorry for them, because I appreciate just how dangerous their job is
and
with the way we drive.
How important as well.
In Nigeria. But instead of spending so much money employing so many road sweepers, why don't we compel our people and train them to stop throwing their refuse all over the place? Singapore was able to ban chewing gum from an entire country. And guess what? No one chews gum in Singapore. Something as personal as that, the government was able to enforce it. Why can't we do something about dumping of refuse in Nigeria? It is embarrassing, and the rainy season brings out the filth of our cities even more.
Well, I'll still reiterate this, all right, that the structure you put in place will determine how you operate, will determine what we define as your habit. You mentioned Singapore, that you don't treat chewing gum. The chewing gum law in Singapore was as a consequence of the nuisance chewing gum was causing the government. That is, all pavement were littered and that was becoming a national embarrassment. A law came, and you were sanctioned. You throw chewing gum, you better to pay fine. All right? There was a reprimand. There was a time in Nigeria that putting up your seatbelt was seen like a fashion. But when the FRC was serious about it, you know, it's not a habit in Nigeria. It's a habit. Whether the FRC will be there or not, you naturally put on your seatbelt. The same thing. If you know that you're going to pay for your waste, for refuse, whether you throw on the road or you leave it in your house, you will learn to leave it in your house. And for not leaving the refuse in your house, that is, if you have a PSP that gets to your house and we are not seeing refuse in your house, you not just pay for the monthly charge, you pay for the default charge.
There's a lot of, there's a lot you are not saying in what you're saying, Mr. Oresa. Okay. Remember, because when you're talking about structures to reduce that our filthiness, if I can use the term, you remember that in the between 83 and 85, the first coming of the Buhari administration as a military man, there was such a thing as war against indiscipline. In this false republic, was it the Lagos state government or the national government that came up with kick against indiscipline. So those structures are there. What is weakening them?
Consistency is not there. We're not consistent in the way we operate those laws. All right, so we have a flip-flop. Or a government comes and says, no, I'm not interested. A government will come institutionalize it. And apart from that, apart from the flip-flop, the inconsistency in policy, there was a time in Lagos, it was almost a taboo to see anybody bringing refuse to the road. Yeah. Like you can recall, because people will arrest you and you are going to pay for it, like I told you. I mean, you can imagine the street of Mushi in those days. Just not too far away, 6, 7 years ago. You don't see refuse on the road again because people were paying. Even at Mushi, people were compelled to pay. And if you don't pay, you'll be taken to court. All right? So everybody, you know, something will change you. But again, another government came. There was a kind of a swing and said, oh, bring refuse on the road, we'll be picking on the road. Then we went back. More of the refuse, they will lie down on the road unpicked. 3/4 of it will get washed in the drainage, and the road will get damaged, and the rest of it. So if they are consistent with our policy, all right, there are some things we don't toy with. We don't play games with when it comes to environment. Environment should be on an exclusive list that you don't toy with environmental laws. Okay. You rather build on it.
Well, Mr. Nze, let me ask you this. How significant is what we can call our environmental indiscipline to flooding?
To put it direct, we are not disciplined as individuals when it comes to our environment. Even whether as individuals or some corporate bodies. Now, I was going to Badagry on the 7th of February. Right from Festac, or say my 2, on the right-hand side, moving towards Ojo, I was, quite amazed what I saw in terms of refuge. Estate developers, I'm talking about maybe corporate bodies, do not pay heed to the environment. For instance, in Abuja, so many estates are, springing up on daily basis. Houses are being built. Even the houses come up first before the infrastructure, like the road and other services. No steps are taken to make provision for nature. Like what happened in, I think they call it Sunday Adewusi Estate, around day in Abuja in 2020. Vehicles were swept away, carried from one compound to the other. Trademore Estate also in Abuja around Ulube. Now, if there's a proper planning by the estate developers, by those who own those estates, who plan those estates, first and foremost is to provide for nature. It must be there. Somebody in Gwagwalada, in Abuja here, was crying last year that he had lived at a particular spot for about 24 years. Yeah, what we call return interval when it comes to the rains. It might come back in 5 days. The kind of magnitude of rain that we experienced this year might come back in 5 years, 10 years, 100 years. Like the 2012 flood incident in Nigeria, the worst in recent time. People were saying it is a 100-year, it has 100-year return interval. But within 6 years, in 2018, we had something that was worse than that. Only it could have been quite glaring. But in 2018, Cameroon didn't release water from their dam, the Lagdo Dam. If they had released water, 2012 could have been a child's play. So, human beings or individuals, corporate bodies have a lot to do to safeguard our environment. We should be environment friendly in our planning. If you know that if I throw away a plastic container, if I have in mind that This plastic container I'm throwing outside my house cannot atomize. It cannot become disseminated. It must find its way somewhere to cause problem or challenge for another person. I won't throw it. It again, from my own perspective as an agency, falls back to relevant governments that have apparatus that owe it as a duty to the citizens to implement or enforce the laws, like Mr. Rosai was mentioning there. If I'm certain, if I'm aware that if I breach any rule, the penalty will follow. Who gives the penalty? It's not the individual, it's the government. Issue of breaking the light, throwing things here and if I do it, like you also mentioned there, in 1984 to 85, I was in Lagos then. Even to urinate by the roadside, you never did it that time. To queue up to enter vehicle, we never did it. Why? Government was enforcing the law it made. Such could be done even today to ensure that our environment is safeguarded.
Mr. Nze, let's move to the agric side of all this for a bit. We know that there are challenges right now, insecurity and all that. But let's just imagine that these are normal times. Round about now, when the rains are just starting, what normally are farmers doing?
You know, there have been serious advocacy by the Nigerian Meteorological Agency through what they call agric meteorology. It has gone down to the grassroots to advise farmers. In fact, I think this week the DG of NIMET, Professor Matazu, and some of his staff, they were in Kebbi State, meeting with the stakeholders, farmers that are well organized, what we call maybe Water Users Association, meeting with them to advise them on planting, cropping for 2021. When to plant, when not to plant, with regards to maybe rainfall. It really hit us so much when what happened in 2020, came into being. The flooding. Hundreds of thousands of hectares of land were washed away, where they have agricultural, items. Washed away in Jigawa. I was there. Anambra State suffered greatly. Even Kano State. Is it Bayelsa? These have heightened food insecurity. Now, like you mentioned, or like we know it, the most that the farmers could do, even in the midst of security threats, that are no longer able to go to the places they need to go to farm, the little that they are able to put in place are again being threatened. But I'm aware the step that we are taken by government, the CBN, and other sectors of government, insurance companies, to cushion the effect of damages that we have done to crops in 2020, giving loans to assistance to farmers to go back. And again, nature has another way of compensating itself. When there was heavy flooding, for instance, in Kebbi State, because they were crying that they may not have, again, 3 farming seasons. But the excess flood that came in from Niger Republic kept the soil wet beyond the time that they were able to go back and still maintain the normal number of cropping seasons they have in a year. So by and large, flooding that took place in 2020 affected food security in the country. In addition to that one, we're already suffering from the security threats that farmers can no longer go as far as they ought to go to do their farming.
Yeah, Mr. Resanya, virtually every state in Nigeria is agrarian. And we knew the rains would come. And Ogun State is no less. So speak to us both as an environmental consultant that you are and as someone who has to interface with government giving counsel. What should state governments like the ones that he has mentioned, Mr. Angze has mentioned, what should state governments be doing now? What should the farmers themselves be doing so that we are not at risk of food insecurity?
Well, thank you. If you listen carefully to Mr. Angze, you can see that it's, for us in this country, it's not for lack of knowledge. It is the application of the knowledge that we have. Most of this knowledge is right there in silos, everywhere. We're not able to apply, we're not able to aggregate and dissipate this thing to farmers that requires them. The average farmer does not have access to all this information, both meteorological, hydrological. It does not. He saw a fertile land by the riverbank and he wanted to farm on it. And it's easy. He is not aware when we are going to have the intense rain, when we're going to have the flash flooding, when we're going to have the discharge. Most of these things are predictable. All right, the flood pattern, the behavior pattern of rainfall, they're all predictable. The knowledge is right there. So we need extension service officers that every government, if we're really serious about agriculture, we need to train the extension service. The extension service officers, they are there to acquire this knowledge, train them, and support farmers to be able to use this knowledge properly. That's the kind of farming you can do by the riverbank. You know when not to farm, you know when to harvest. So the extension officers will warn you, don't plant a seed or don't do farming that will take 9 months. By the riverside, just a kind of farming that will take you 3 months, harvest before the discharge. We already know when we're going to have intense rainfall. We already know when we're going to have flooding by that side. So you must have done your harvest. When to come back, he will tell you that. All right? And this is key. It's missing. And that is why we keep having this problem of destruction of agricultural produce. Somebody will have invested so much and the flood will come out with this. I see we cannot predict it.
Well, it is clear now that both the CBN, the Bank of Agriculture, and all of them need your service at this time to make sure that farmers get this information. Because, for instance, I'm just learning for the first time that, farmers need to understand the calendar of rain, so to speak.
Exactly.
We have to thank you very much for being here this morning. Mr. Ola Resanya is an environmental consultant as well, a special advisor to the governor of Ogun State on the environment. Thank you for your time. We've also had the honor of presence of Mr. Clement Nze, who is Director General, Nigeria Hydrological Service Agency. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and thoughts. The Sunrise continues in a moment. Do stay with us.